This Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we have a Big Ten football matchup between the 4-6, 2-5 in Big Ten play Northwestern Wildcats and the 5-5, 3-4 in Big Ten play Michigan Wolverines. Again, this game will kick off at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 2:30 p.m. Central Time for you Northwestern Wildcat fans, and this game will be streamed on FS1. The Wolverines opened up this game as double-digit favorites, no surprises. The original line was Michigan minus 12, but it has moved down by 1.5 to Michigan minus 10.5 right now. And the Wolverines are given a 79.5% chance to win this game. If Northwestern wants to keep their hopes of bowl eligibility alive for the second year under David Braun, I mean, the fact that they're even in this position, I think is impressive. And I think David Braun is a solid coach with a solid staff, but they need a win here because one more loss and outside of the academic progress rate saving them, they're not going to a bowl game. And for Michigan, the story is a little bit similar. I mean, technically they can lose this game and their bowl hopes are still alive, but you have Ohio State down the road. And regardless of what happens between Indiana and Ohio State this weekend, Michigan is not even half the team Indiana is, nor are they half the team that Ohio State is. And a loss to Northwestern would be such a humiliation to the Michigan program that I don't think Michigan fans or Big Ten fans or college football fans could understand what this would mean. This isn't like Michigan losing to Indiana in 2020 and Indiana turned out to be a good game or a good team. This would be, who played a good game against Michigan, this would be Michigan's worst loss since easily 2020 against MSU. You want to exclude the COVID year because, well, the COVID year was weird? Well, you probably got to go all the way back to, I don't know, like the Brady Hoke years or maybe Rich Rod losing to Toledo or, I mean, I don't know. I don't know all the exact games that were played in every Michigan football year, but this would be one of the most humiliating losses Michigan has suffered, theoretically, over the past several years. So we're going to talk about this game. I'm going to give you a preview and prediction as well. But before we do that, if you could do a few things for the channel, most of which are free, and those are the ones I encourage you to do anyway because those are the most helpful to the channel, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share this video around, like the video, comment your prediction, and join our Discord server via the link in the description or down in the pinned comment. If you can score on those 6 points, get us in the end zone, score a touchdown for college football with Sam, thank you very much. You've done a great service to the channel and the college football world because we are the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube. We're one day going to be the best college football channel on YouTube thanks to you. At the end of the regular season, after conference championship week is over, we will be doing a giveaway to celebrate 20,000 subscribers earned. We earned that a few weeks ago, and we're trying to hit 30,000 subscribers as our next goal. So thank you very much, and if you want to support the channel monetarily, you can donate via Super Chat down in the comment section below, or purchase merchandise on our merchandise store, or sign up as a paid member on the Patreon page to donate monthly automatically. The links to those are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. But subscribing and hitting the notification bell, liking the video, and joining the Discord server, along with commenting, those are the most important things that you can do. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you. And let's get into this right now. So from a broad perspective, Michigan's the better team than Northwestern. We'll get into the details a little bit later because the details, I think, paint a slightly different picture. But broad stroke, Michigan is better than Northwestern. Northwestern is viewed as 2.5 points worse than the average college football team per FPI, 5.8 points better or worse than the average team per S&P Plus, and 7.7 points worse than the average Power 4 team per My Potential Power Index. Michigan is viewed as 5.8 points better than the average college football team per FPI, 6.9 points better than the average college football team per S&P Plus, and 4.4 points better than the average Power 4 team per My Potential Power Index. So the power rankings, all assessed, all combined, say that Michigan should win this game mostly by double digits, even when you look at it from a neutral field angle. And when you factor in home field edge, definitely Michigan should win this game by double digits per the power ratings, per the numbers on paper. But college football, as Josh Pate famously says, and as I also say, is a sport that is not played on paper. You are not what your record says you are. You are also not what your recruiting rankings say you are if your record happens to be above 500, which is a fallacy that a lot of people fall for as well. And you are not always what your average margin of victory says you are. College football is a very complicated sport. Why you win is not always complicated. You score more points than your opponent. It's a simple explanation. But how you get to that point and the team you are through multiple games throughout the regular season, through multiple quarters that you are throughout the regular season, postseason, etc., that's a whole different deal. Michigan and Northwestern converge here a bit when you look at points per play margin and expected points added. Michigan's expected points added margin is actually quite high, 0.071. That means on an expected play-per-play basis, Michigan actually beats their opponent. At least they're expected to beat their opponent based off of, how they play the game. So their success rates on offense and defense. Do they win a specific play? What's their field position like? How are they driving down the field? How are they stopping their opponents or lack thereof from driving down the field? But when you look at the points per play margin, Michigan has a negative 0.007 points per play margin. In the negatives. That's not fun if you're a Michigan fan. That's not fun if you're Sharon Moore. This team started the preseason top 10 with multiple reasons to believe they would be a top 10 team or at least top 25. They are, per points per play margin, below average in terms of dominance. Their opponents just barely squeak past them on a points per play basis. That's not good. And then you look at Northwestern, who is, of course, worse in points per play margin and expected points added margin, negative 0.086 points per play margin, negative 0.037 expected points added margin, but they're not that much worse. They're not that far off. They are not even a tenth of a placement behind Michigan. In EPA margin they are, but in points per play margin, which matters more, they're not even a tenth of a placement behind. I mean, these teams are I think they're closer than the power ratings would care to admit, and we'll talk about why that is throughout this video. And you look at the strength of schedule, Northwestern's faced the 31st strength of schedule, Michigan's faced the 20th, not too big of a difference right there. Michigan is 47th in game control, Northwestern 72nd, and Michigan's 56th in efficiency. Northwestern is 92nd. These are two teams that are certainly outside the top 25, that are certainly outside of the top 35, that could even be outside of the top 50. This is going to be probably a low-scoring, boring affair, especially because Michigan, whether they can beat Ohio State or not, they can, but the likelihoods are infinitesimally small. Whether it's likely that they'll beat OSU or not, they are going to prepare for that Ohio State game because they've beaten them before. It's a rivalry. They'll want to win. So even though their current record and performance says they shouldn't overlook Northwestern, there is a fairly good chance that they will. There's also an equally good chance that Northwestern sold out for OSU after the bye week and they could be exhausted and dead by the time they get to Ann Arbor to play in the Big House. But this is a game nonetheless. We cannot accurately account for all the outside factors. So let's get into the matchup here, the critical matchup that will determine who wins and who loses. And I think that it's Northwestern's passing offense and pass protection unit, their offensive line, against Michigan's pass defense and their pass rush. I think that determines the game. Northwestern's rushing offense, it has shown signs of life against Ohio State, a little bit against Purdue, but not much against Wisconsin, for example. Not a whole lot against Iowa. And those signs of life against Ohio State existed for basically a drive before Ohio State shut them down for the rest of the game. So they don't really have that good of a rushing attack. And Jack Lausch is mobile. He can keep defenses honest there. But overall, without a strong running back room, without a really strong offensive line, and then you look at the rushing defense that Michigan has, that's not where the game is going to be won. It may be a part of it, but really where the game will be won is through the air for Northwestern. If they can get behind Michigan's secondary, and quick statistic for you guys, by the way. Northwestern averages 2.8 red zone scoring attempts per game. Michigan averages 2.4. So Michigan's offense is indeed one of the least productive and worst offenses in the country. The reason they're top 100 in points per play, yards per point, and the reason they're not outside the top 120 in points per game is because their defense gets enough turnovers and has earned enough defensive touchdowns, and their rushing attack and tight ends are just barely good enough. They're elite at tight end, great at running back, I think, but they're just good enough in the aggregate to outweigh the massive disappointment at quarterback, wide receiver, and also to a certain degree, the offensive line. But look here, Michigan's rushing defense, they're only allowing 3.4 opponent rushing yards per game, and they faced a tough strength of schedule, and they're outside of the top 25 in opponent yards per pass attempt, opponent yards per completion, and they're outside the top 100 in opponent pass attempts per game and opponent completions per game. So teams pass on Michigan a lot. They have some success passing on them, and yet Michigan is 11th in opponent rushing yards per game, only allowing 102.8, and they only allow 3.4 yards per carry. I do think Michigan has one of the better rushing defenses in the Big Ten. In terms of solely looking at the defensive line, I do think they have a better defensive line than Penn State, than Ohio State. I think they have the Big Ten's best D-line, potentially the nation's best D-line, though South Carolina and Ole Miss may have something to say about that. And Ohio State, and I think even Indiana and Penn State can contend for that as well. But Michigan's up there. Definitely a top 5 D-line, could be number 1. The problem is linebacker is shaky, secondary is shaky, the rest of the team is just discombobulated. The defensive line is Michigan's only elite quality this season, and you don't win a ton of games if you only have an elite D-line and everything else is great at best. That sounds weird, because if everything was great, D-line was elite, Michigan would be a really good team this year. But what I mean is great at best, and then there are other positions like quarterback that's bad, wide receiver that's bad, O-line is below average, average, maybe above average or good on some days, but certainly not great. Tight end, elite if healthy, but you only have one tight end in Loveland who's elite. The others are just good or great. The secondary is average. Linebacker is average too. It doesn't help. And Michigan, as we'll get into, is also, as I've documented and well documented, they are poorly coached. That rushing defense going up against a Northwestern rushing offense that only averages 3.4 yards per carry is not going to work. But Northwestern leads Michigan in yards per pass attempt, averaging 5.6, and yards per completion, they average 10.5. Michigan only averages 9.3 yards per completion. And Northwestern only allows a 4.4 sack percentage, which is 36th, so they do have decent protection. A part of that's Jack Lausch's mobility and pocket presence. Northwestern has an average team pass rating of a 99.7. It's pretty terrible, and they only average 167.4 passing yards per game. But all in all, I think that you look at Bryce Kurtz, you look at some of the tight ends they have, you look at the fact that Lausch has had some good games. I think this is the area where if Northwestern is going to win, it will be through the air. It will be this area. Lausch on the year has not been a successful quarterback, but 1,321 passing yards, 54.6% of his pass attempts are completed, 5.8 yards per pass attempt, 5 touchdowns, 4 picks. You look on the ground, and Lausch has 226 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 3 yards per carry. Mobile quarterbacks historically have given Michigan problems. It's no different this year, where Dylan Gabriel was able to work Michigan in part because of his mobility, and Aiden Childs, when he did run at times, was able to do some things to Michigan with his mobility. And don't even forget about Quinn Ewers, who isn't really mobile at all, but he had just enough mobility to make some plays, and that really, really messed with Michigan. I bet you USC would have beaten Michigan if Maeva was their starting quarterback. I mean, Michigan, you don't see a lot of mobile QBs in the Big Ten, and Michigan, even at their peak, outside of like last year, did not do a very good job against mobile quarterbacks. And even last year, they had problems stopping Drew Aller from running the football, who was not anywhere close to a dual threat QB last season. But that's the critical matchup right there, ladies and gentlemen, is a Northwestern passing offense that's terrible against a Michigan passing defense that, again, outside the top 100 in opponent completions and opponent attempts. Michigan allows 232.8 passing yards per game. They allow a 130.8 average team passer rating, which is 60th. Their sack percentage is 6.74%, 44th, which is impressive given how many attempts teams try to throw on Michigan. But they're not great overall. They're not Michigan's passing defense. In fact, I would say it's average, especially without Will Johnson, and even then it could probably be below average. You could probably knock down that a tick. Looking at these offenses, and this is just going to be insufferable because these offenses are not good, so we'll make this very quick. Davis Warren leads the team in passing yards with 869. He completes 61.6% of his throws. He has thrown 5 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. He averages 6 yards per pass attempt. He has a 114.7 passer rating and a QBR that is 50.7. You look at Michigan's receiver game. Colston Loveland leads the team in receiving yards with 560, 4 receiving touchdowns. Tyler Morris and Samaj Morgan have 170, 134 yards respectively. Morris has 2 receiving touchdowns. Samaj Morgan has 1. Marlon Klein is probably the only other player that you need to know through the air. I mean, Michigan's completely barren at wide receiver. I think the only receiver room I might have that is worse than Michigan's might be Iowa's. I just think that Iowa has actually decently better QB play, and also they have a better offense overall, so it makes it life easier on the wide receivers. They have a better coordinator too than Michigan does, but incredibly barren receiving game for Michigan. Michigan's threat in this game is Kalel Mullings at running back with 740 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns. Edwards has 513 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, averaging 4.5 yards per carry. Mullings is averaging 5.2. Alex Orji averaging 4.6 yards per carry with a rushing touchdown and 228 rushing yards. Michigan's rushing offense has been disappointing, but they're still averaging over 4 yards per carry. You only have 12 rushing touchdowns. This is a Michigan team that is just, it's not good. It's not. There are no redeeming qualities on this offense outside of Kalel Mullings. Maybe Greg Crippen at center when he plays, or Miles Hinton at tackle's been pretty good, and then Colston Loveland at tight end. This is a boring offense to talk about, so we're going to move on to Northwestern's, which is also, again, pretty boring. Cam Porter leads the Wildcats in rushing yards with 424, averaging 4 yards per carry with 6 rushing touchdowns. Joseph Hyman II has 238 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Lausch, as I already discussed, 226 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Bryce Kurtz leads the team in receiving yards with 506. No receiving touchdowns yet, though. Former Michigan wide receiver A.J. Henning is second in receiving yards with 468. He has 3 receiving touchdowns and leads the team in receptions with 45. Thomas Gordon at tight end, Cam Porter at running back, and Marshall Ling at tight end. They all have at least 100 receiving yards or more. The fact that Northwestern has around 400 more receiving yards than Michigan is just, it's depressing. It's depressing, to put a word there. I do think that Michigan overall is better on the offensive line as a whole. I do believe that with Miles Hinton, with players like Greg Crippen, Giovanni El-Hadi, even Evan Link, who's had his struggles at times, I think that Michigan has a good offensive line at times. At other times, it's below average, even bad in pass protection, average at other times too. Northwestern, though, is not at the same level. I mean, Davis Warren has been sacked 5 times this year. Michigan's allowed 14 sacks. Northwestern's allowed 16. Northwestern cannot even average 4 yards per carry. 3.5 yards per carry. 12 rushing touchdowns, though, that matches Michigan's. And by the way, as we switch over to defense here, Will Johnson still leads Michigan in interceptions and he hasn't played for half of the season. So it's not like these defenses are any more entertaining to talk about, if we're being honest here. But I'm here to deliver news and also my opinion, not just talk about what's entertaining here. Michigan has 25 sacks, 42 passes defended, 7 interceptions, 5 forced fumbles. Northwestern, on the other hand, 20 sacks, 41 passes defended, 7 interceptions, 4 forced fumbles. Pay attention to Northwestern's Aiden Hubbard on the defensive line, Anto Saka, Michael Kilbane, Mac Uhlayan, Carmine Bastone, Najee Story. They do have actually a deep defensive line. Northwestern does. It's one of their more impressive qualities on defense, where Northwestern, in stopping the run, they're only allowing opponents to average 3.5 yards per carry, 24th. 116.8 opponent rushing yards per game. That's 23rd. That's after the Ohio State game, by the way. That's factored in. 6.1 opponent rushing first downs per game, 15th. Their passing defense is actually worse than Michigan's. They're closer to Michigan in stopping the run than they are to Michigan in stopping the pass. They are outside the top 50 in both opponent yards per pass attempt, 7th, and opponent yards per completion, 11.3. Their opponent average team passer rating it's lower, 128.9 versus Michigan's 130.8. And Northwestern actually faces more pass attempts and pass completions than Michigan does. So teams love to pass on Michigan and Northwestern. They like to avoid running on them. I'm curious as to how both of these staffs will approach this game plan here. In the DB room for Northwestern, because we were just talking about sacks, pay attention to Theron Johnson, 10 interceptions, or 10 passes defended, 2 interceptions. Josh Fussell, Xander Mueller at linebacker, Devin Smith and Evan Smith at defensive back. They combined overall have 14 passes defended, 2 interceptions, and a sack. For Michigan, up front, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, Derek Moore, Rayshon Benny. Their leader in sacks right now is Josiah Stewart with 6.5, and also TJ Guy with 4.5 is second. Josiah Stewart also has 2 forced fumbles. And on defense, Zeke Berry, Makari Page, Jair Hill, Ernest Hausman in defending the pass. They combined have 5 interceptions and 17 passes defended, and a forced fumble and 2 sacks. I think that Northwestern is not quite there with Michigan up front on the D line. And while statistically Northwestern is behind Michigan in passing defense more than they are rushing defense, I think the opposite's actually true in reality. Like, I think the statistics are a bit deceiving. I think that Michigan's D-line, their players that they have, are further ahead of Northwestern's players on the D-line than Michigan's DBs and linebackers are ahead of Northwestern's. I think that there's an argument for Northwestern to have the better linebackers or the better DBs than the Michigan Wolverines, or the other way around. I think that Michigan is better in the trenches, no further comment, and I think Michigan also has the better special teams unit. Tommy Doman has been very up and down this year, but Michigan's, I think, okay at returning punts when they do, and Dominic Zvada is a weapon at kicker. When it comes to coaching, this is the real kicker here. This is why Northwestern has a chance. If Jim Harbaugh and his staff from last year were still here, Northwestern would not have much of a chance to win this game. They wouldn't. But the reality is that Sharon Moore, Wink Martindale, and Kurt Campbell and many of their assistant coaches are some of the worst and least qualified in the entire Power Four. David Braun's a better head coach than Sharon Moore right now. And it's the same thing with a lot of his coordinators and assistant coaches. So I think Northwestern here actually has the coaching edge. And because of that, in spite of Michigan's talent, I do think Northwestern has a pretty good chance at pulling off the upset here. I'm not quite going to go there, but I think that Northwestern covers. I think that Michigan wins in a 20 to 13 type game. Maybe it should have been 16 to 13 because I don't know how Michigan is going to be scoring much in the red zone on this Northwestern defense. My power ratings say that Michigan should win this game pretty handily, and this should be Michigan's one of their bigger or biggest wins of the season, winning by about 20 points. 20.1 is the spread from potential power. But I disagree with that. I think that ultimately Northwestern is going to come in. They're going to provide a fight. They could pull it off. I would not be shocked at all if Northwestern won, but I do think Michigan escapes with about a 7-point win to bring them to bowl eligibility. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal and Connell OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all conference members. Check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server, again via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. And have a great day, everyone. Go Wildcats and go Blue.